I am thrilled to be here and thrilled to be at a conference and a focus of not just change makers, but folks who are actually focused on results, which is a seemingly innovative thing to talk about right now, but folks who are not just doing it, but taking it very seriously and making a real example for all of us. I am the very proud CEO of an organization called Robinhood. And for those who don't know, Robinhood is actually a 31-year-old organization that's a New York-based organization that's focused exclusively on anti-poverty efforts and poverty alleviation within New York. Where Robinhood first started off as an organization that first started making investments of about total of about $40,000 of investments within various organizations within New York City, and saying, how can we utilize data? How can we utilize metrics and analytics to be able to both find and fund and build the most effective poverty-fighting organizations throughout the city? Now, 31 years later, Robinhood has now dispensed a little over $3 billion into the space and $3 billion into the work. But there's also a very important strategic evolution that the organization is making. And that it's that after 31 years, and after the usage of data and analytics, by being able to work on the ground with communities to find and identify the most effective organizations, we also now collectively understand and know that that will never be anywhere near enough. Because we're talking about working in communities that you can put in millions, but when you're talking about communities that have been neglected by billions, underserved by tens of billions, the reality is each and every one of us now have to have a core focus on how do we push harder and how do we think differently. Where even organizationally, the idea and the goal of the organization was once having a conversation about a focus on poverty alleviation. To be very honest, I'm not sure exactly what that means. None of us should be in the business of trying to make poverty more tolerable. None of us should be in the business about how do you make poverty easier on people. Every one of us should be focused on this idea of creating levels of sustainable economic mobility so you can make poverty history for people. Yes. Because the truth is that we are still living in a framework where we are choosing as a society, how much pain are we going to allow other people to suffer? How much can they tolerate before they get antsy? And none of us should be in the business of sustaining that nor supporting that, or acting like if we aren't pushing hard enough on our frameworks and hard enough on the work that we are doing, that we are not implicitly tolerating it. And so how does that mean? What exactly does that look like in terms of a structure of an organization like a Robinhood and how we think about Robinhood's role in the field? The first is being very clear about the way that we must align with other partners within the field. There is not one lane nor one silo that is responsible for the levels of economic inequality that we have within our society. Everybody should feel a sense of indictment. This is not on the government, this is not on the private sector, it's not on nonprofits, it's on each and every one of us. And so when we're talking about and working in communities where we have seen a sustained and fundamental breakdown, the only way we can address it is a sustained and fundamental buildup, where everyone has a unique and sustaining role in terms of making sure we are addressing the problem. We know in our work that we can focus on philanthropy and we can focus on funding good organizations, but we know there are specific limitations in what that means. We can be risk capital. We can invest early. We can find challenging problems and put capital in where we know others might not be able to, but we also know just simply because of size, there will be limitations on scale. So how then do we enter into every relationship and every partnership with an idea that part of what we have to do is think about what becomes the 3 and the 5 and the 7-year goal, that our capital should be patient, but that our capital should not be permanent. It's not to serve as a line item, it's to really serve as something that can serve as a fundamental lift. So we think about in the history of an organization like ours, where Robinhood was the first organization that came in and fundamentally supported needle exchanges. And we funded needle exchanges when everyone thought it was a controversial issue. What do you mean you're going to give clean needles? Well, the data continue to show us that when you're looking at the rise of HIV/AIDS, that the exchange of dirty needles was one of the things that was actually driving this rise of these diseases. So we decided to put funding in. The data continued to show us this was something that could work, so we funded it. Now, Robinhood doesn't fund needle exchanges. Nobody does. The reason is because the federal government does it. But the federal government was never going to be first money in. The federal government was not going to be the first one to use taxpayer dollars for experimental capital. That's where we came in. We think about issues in 2014 where we founded and funded something called iCare, which was looking at supporting undocumented migrant children. Because at the time we saw an initial kick-up of undocumented migrant children who were coming and we felt needed legal supports. Because it is never a good thing, nor never a humane thing, when you're having children who are having to defend themselves. And never should we ever stand in the way of when we're asking our humanity to take second place to our nationality. And so we funded this thing. So we funded this idea and this concept called iCare. Now, iCare is something that's existing not just throughout New York City, but existing in many cities throughout the country, where it's saying, regardless of your documentation status, we should never have children who are being put in a position to have to defend themselves. That adults have a responsibility in this too. So understanding the core and the key role of partnership. The second core and key thing is that we have to identify and use every single lever at our disposal to be able to address the fundamental problem that we are trying to solve. So what does that mean? It means that philanthropy is going to be important. The capital distribution is going to be necessary, but it will never be enough. There's actually a quote that sits on my desk from Dr. King. And the quote that sits on my desk from Dr. King, it says, "Philanthropy is commendable, but the philanthropists can never forget the economic injustice that makes philanthropy necessary." Philanthropy is commendable, but the philanthropists can never forget the economic injustice that makes philanthropy necessary. We are living in a system of economic injustice, period. And so that means we then have to use every single lever at our disposal and every single voice to be able to make sure we're actually addressing the issue that we are trying to solve. Making sure that we are actively working at changing a narrative about who is in poverty and why. We all in this room know this idea, this bunk narrative of if people would just work harder, right? If they would just get a job. Yeah, but here's the reality. When we're talking about people living in poverty, they have jobs. Many of them, multiple jobs, and are still living in poverty. Someone has to explain to me, and again, I'm a data person. I love data and I love numbers, and someone has to explain how we can square an understanding of having a fundamental, zero unemployment, a booming market, and poverty rates going up. It does not take a PhD in economics to understand what that means if we're watching more and more people who are living in poverty who actually have jobs. We must attack this narrative about who is in poverty and why with everything we've got. We also have to understand the role that policy plays in all of this. We don't have levels of economic disparity that we have right now simply because philanthropy has not done its job. We have levels of economic disparity because we have policies that are currently putting people and keeping people in poverty. And doing it in our names. Doing it in our names. So how then do we use and leverage our voice? How do we use and leverage our influence to make sure that the policies that we are pushing and the policies that are being passed are a better reflection of our humanity and a better reflection of how we hope to be seen and represented? I was 14 years old when my mother got her first job that actually gave her benefits. 14 years old when she actually got a job where she only needed to work one job. 14 years old when she got a job that gave her reliable hours as she was trying to raise 3 children on her own. What saved our family, what gave my mother an acknowledgement that she was being seen, and what gave her a platform to not just change her own destiny, but to change the destiny of her 3 children and her yet unborn, now born, but yet unborn grandchildren, was not charity. It was justice. We don't do charity. We do justice. And the ability to work collectively to focus all of our individual efforts, all of our individual resources, and all of our individual powers, not on helping, not on saving, but on justice. That's the prerequisite of our time. That's why we do what we do. We're thankful to be with you all, not just today, but we're thankful to be with you in the fight going forward. Bless y'all. Thank you so much.